In the shadowed corridors of Harbor's Edge Veterans Hospital, a new battle is about to be waged. The Calabrese crime family believes they've found the perfect cover for their smuggling racket, a quiet facility staffed by unassuming nurses. They've kidnapped one of them, never suspecting the fury they've just unleashed. Because Katherine Walsh isn't just another nurse, she's the wife of Master Sergeant Michael Walsh, a Force Recon Marine whose skill in silent warfare has toppled entire enemy cells overseas. Known to his brothers in arms as the Watchdog, Michael stalks his prey with lethal precision, striking without remorse at anyone who threatens his own. What follows is the story of how one husband's relentless resolve dismantled a powerful Mafia family from the inside out, proving that some warriors never truly come home from the fight, and that underestimating a Marine's wife can be the last mistake you ever make. Quick pause before we continue. Welcome to Fabled Frames. Please tell us where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is mind-blowing. Katherine Kate Walsh had always loved the quiet hours of the night shift. The hustle and bustle of Harbor's Edge Veterans Hospital simmered down after midnight, leaving behind a gentle hush where the only sounds were the beeping of monitors and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. It was a time she could think, reflect, and connect one-on-one with her patients, many of them veterans bearing scars, both visible and invisible from foreign conflicts. After 15 years in nursing, Kate considered herself well prepared for anything. She'd handled everything from late-night code blues to stabilizing rowdy patients in the psychiatric ward. But recently, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong in the hospital's back corridors, especially around the loading dock at night. A series of unusual shipments had begun arriving a few weeks prior, always after midnight, always marked with cryptic alphanumeric codes instead of standard hospital supply labels. At first, Kate told herself it was none of her business. She was just a nurse, not security or logistics. But curiosity got the better of her, especially when she caught a glimpse of one metal crate's open lid, revealing not medical supplies but sealed packages that resembled heavy brick-like objects. One night, after finishing her final rounds, she decided to investigate. She found the loading dock empty except for a stack of those mysterious crates. Kate grabbed her phone, heart pounding, and snapped a few photos. She didn't know if they were contraband, drugs, maybe, or stolen medical supplies. Whatever they weren't standard. Harbor's Edge was a veterans hospital under federal jurisdiction, making it the last place that should host anything off the record. Kate's sense of duty flared. She had spent a decade and a half caring for veterans and believed deeply in supporting the men and women who served. Something about these shipments felt like an affront to the trust these servicemen and servicewomen placed in the system. That trust was sacred to her. Soon, she noticed other irregularities. Extra staff members, none wearing standard IDs, hovered around the dock after dark. When she asked routine questions about the new shipments, she got vague answers or quick dismissals. The final straw came the previous night when a man in a tailored suit, wearing expensive leather shoes, stepped out of a black SUV and gave off the unmistakable aura of someone with power and something to hide. He looked at her for just a fraction too long, his eyes cold and assessing. That was when she knew. She had to tell someone. She had her suspicions, but no proof. At home, she confided in her husband, Michael Walsh, a Master Sergeant in the Marine's elite Force Recon unit. He was halfway through a deployment, though it was a short one, and due back in just a few days for a brief leave. Over a hurried video call, she mentioned she might have stumbled upon something shady at the hospital. Michael immediately grew serious, his questions sharp. When was this happening? Who was involved? Did she feel unsafe? Kate felt a wave of reassurance just hearing his voice. Michael's stoic, steady presence was a bedrock in her life. He was the type of Marine who rarely spoke about his missions, but one thing she knew for certain, when someone threatened what he cared about, he became fiercely protective. His nickname in the Corps was Watchdog, referencing his watchful vigilance and unstoppable resolve. She teased him about it, but she also knew the name was well-earned. "Screw the hospital bureaucracy," he had said, face grim on the pixelated screen. "File an official report." If they shut you down, come to me. I'll raise hell if I have to. Kate had promised him she would. After all, what could happen in just a few days? Michael would be home soon, and she'd have more solid evidence by then. Then they could take it to the authorities together. She had no idea how quickly events would escalate. That same night, as she clocked out at 2 a.m., Kate was grabbed from behind. 1 second, she was pressing the elevator button to go down to the parking garage. The next, a cloth drenched in a pungent chemical was forced over her mouth. She tried to scream, tried to struggle, but her limbs felt leaden. The world spun into a blur. Voices hissed. There was the clatter of metal, a scuff of shoes, the sharp sting of something pressing at her neck. Darkness swallowed her consciousness. When she finally came to, Kate was in an abandoned warehouse. Her wrists were zip-tied to a metal chair, her ankles bound together. She blinked groggily, struggling to clear the haze, her heart hammering in her chest. A surge of cold dread coursed through her veins. What she had stumbled upon was apparently significant enough to kidnap her over. Just as she began to gather her surroundings, a tall figure stepped into the beam of a single overhead light. The man was well-groomed with slicked-back hair, wearing a suit that looked more like it belonged in a boardroom than a dingy warehouse. Yet his eyes gave him away. This was not a friendly businessman. This was someone used to standing on top of a criminal empire. The snooping nurse finally woke up, he said, voice smooth. You've been a real pain, Kate. He let her name hang in the musty air. I'm Vincent Romano. And you, Ms. Walsh, have been poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Terror warred with defiance in her gut. She stared back at him, swallowing hard. Kate realized, with growing horror, that this was part of a broader, more sinister operation. The Mafia, likely the Calabrese crime family, judging by the accent and the name, had infiltrated the hospital's supply chain for their own ends, and she had uncovered just enough to make them take drastic action. Romano circled her slowly. I hear you have a husband, a Marine, isn't he? He paused, letting his words linger. Far away and helpless to save you, I'm afraid. A flicker of determination lit up inside her despite the throbbing in her temples. Vincent Romano had no idea who Michael Walsh really was. Yes, he was a Marine, but not just any Marine. He was a Force Recon Master Sergeant with a reputation for being unstoppable on the battlefield. If anyone threatened his wife, there would be no corner of the earth safe for them. She hoped that thought would steel her courage. Let's see how tough you are, Romano said, snapping his fingers. Two burly men stepped from the shadows, their faces hidden in half-light. We'll find out everything you know about our operation. Trust me, we have ways of making you talk. Kate's heart thundered. She was zip-tied to a chair in a warehouse in the dead of night, at the mercy of men who had no qualms about dealing with obstacles by burying them 6 feet under. But she had an advantage they could never anticipate. It wasn't just Michael. It was the entire sense of resolve she'd built over years. She'd seen soldiers on the brink of death cling to hope. She'd guided them through their darkest hours. If she'd learned one lesson from them, it was this: never give up. And so she glared at Vincent Romano, struggling to keep her voice steady. You have no idea what you've started. A slow smile curled his lips, cruel and mocking. Maybe not, he said softly, stepping out of the overhead light. But I'm looking forward to finding out. A single light bulb swung above her head, casting flickering shadows on the concrete walls. Each movement teased her with the possibility of rescue or further torment. She swallowed the terror that threatened to consume her. Little did Vincent Romano and his men know they had just made the worst mistake of their criminal careers. 5,000 miles away, in the sweltering confines of a remote desert base, Master Sergeant Michael Walsh closed his laptop and exhaled. The video call with Kate had ended on a strange note earlier. She seemed worried, said she discovered something suspicious at work. His gut told him it was serious. He tried calling her again a few hours later, but got no answer. That was unusual. Michael rubbed his temples, recalling the tension in Kate's voice. He'd always teased her about her innate curiosity. You know what they say about cats, he would joke, but she'd just roll her eyes. Now, her curiosity had uncovered something big, and the more he thought about the unanswered calls, the more certain he became that something was wrong. Very wrong. Stationed on a short deployment for intelligence gathering, Michael was in the final days of his mission, but protocol demanded he stay until official leave was granted. He paced his bunk area, ignoring the metallic clang of boots on the floor outside. If he wanted answers, he needed to contact someone stateside who could check in on Kate. He pulled out his phone again, an older satellite model that allowed him secure lines, and dialed a stateside number. His friend, Captain David "Doc" Silverman, picked up on the second ring. Doc was an old Marine buddy, now working at a military base near Harbor's Edge. "Mikey, it's late," Doc said, voice groggy. "I know," Michael replied, "but I can't reach Kate. She told me something weird was going on at the hospital." She sounded worried. He explained the situation, leaving out specific details about contraband. He didn't know how far the corruption went. The fewer people who knew specifics, the safer it might be for Kate. But he trusted Document. They'd been through firefights together, literally dragging each other to safety more than once. "Want me to swing by her place?" Doc asked. "I can do that first thing in the morning." "Thanks," Michael said, still uneasy. "If you can't find her, check the hospital. Her shift ends late. Maybe she's still around." After hanging up, Michael still felt restless. He stared out at the desert night, the sky ablaze with stars, so unlike the city lights of home. A memory floated to the surface. The last time Kate's voice sounded this anxious was years ago, when a patient with severe PTSD threatened to take his own life in the hospital courtyard. She'd called Michael, desperate for guidance. He told her to stay calm and do what she did best. Be a nurse, be a friend, be the caring soul who could talk sense into a lost soldier. She did, and it saved that man's life. Now, though, she was the one who might need saving. And Michael wasn't there. Tension seized his gut like a tightening vice. He was a Marine, a Force Recon soldier trained for infiltration, extraction, and direct action missions. Yet, in this moment, he felt powerless. The standard procedure was to wait, gather more intel, and not leap without knowing you're landing. But this wasn't some far-off battlefield. This was his wife's life. Patience be damned, he needed to get home. Fortune, it seemed, was on his side. The following morning, Michael received an unexpected directive. The intelligence portion of his mission had wrapped up ahead of schedule. The brass decided to rotate him home early. By noon, he was on a military flight back to the States, adrenaline coursing through his veins. During the long flight, Michael tried Kate's phone repeatedly, still no response. Each unanswered ring chipped away at his composure. His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she'd lost her phone. Maybe she was staying late at the hospital. Maybe she was sleeping off an overnight shift. Rational excuses piled up, yet none felt right. He tried to calm himself by visualizing scenarios. He recalled training exercises in which infiltration behind enemy lines demanded absolute precision. His job was to stay calm, plan meticulously, and remain mission-focused. He vowed to approach whatever awaited him in the same manner. But a quiet fear gnawed at him. If criminals had targeted Kate, they might not realize the severity of the storm they just unleashed. Nor did they realize the lengths he would go to protect the woman he loved. Despite his best efforts, by the time the plane touched down, Michael's anxiety was at an all-time high. He moved through the tarmac with the urgency of a man who had no time to waste. Doc was waiting for him in a black SUV near the airstrip. That was odd. Doc rarely had clearance to pick up arrivals. Michael slung his duffel bag into the back seat. "Thanks for coming," he said, climbing in. Doc's face was grave. "No one's seen Kate since last night. I talked to a coworker who said she clocked out, but security cameras show her heading to the parking garage and never leaving. Her car is still in the garage, engine cold." "Something's not right, man." Michael's stomach twisted. "I was afraid of that." We need to go to the hospital. Maybe check security footage ourselves. There's gotta be something. Doc nodded, putting the SUV in gear. I pulled some strings. We'll be able to get inside. But be careful. If the hospital is compromised, we don't know who's involved. As they sped off, Michael couldn't help but clench his fists. Force Recon had trained him in crisis situations. He was no stranger to extracting allies or hostages from perilous environments. This time, though, it was personal, and that made it all the more urgent and infinitely more dangerous. Within 30 minutes, they arrived at Harbor's Edge. Michael felt a cold wave of déjà vu. The place looked so ordinary in the afternoon sun, with patients shuffling around, nurses in scrubs, and uniformed staff greeting each other politely. It was almost impossible to believe Kate might be in the clutches of criminals at that very moment. They entered through a side door, courtesy of Doc's connection with one of the hospital security supervisors, a fellow Marine veteran named Al Farley. He led them to a small room lined with monitors. "We caught her on camera around 2 in the morning," Al said, rewinding footage. "Here, she's pushing the elevator button." On screen, Kate waited, phone in hand. Michael leaned forward, heart pounding. Suddenly, a figure emerged behind her, pressing a cloth to her mouth. Her body went limp almost instantly as she was dragged out of view. Michael's jaw clenched so hard it felt like it would crack. Did the camera catch his face? No, Al replied, voice tight. "It looks like a professional job." The assailant avoided the camera angle. After that, we lost visual. No sign of her leaving through any of the main exits. It's likely she was loaded into a vehicle from the service ramp. The room fell silent. Doc placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, his face grim with shared fury. Michael didn't need words to know his friend's thoughts. They had to find Kate, and quickly. "Any suspicious vehicles around that time?" Michael finally asked. Al nodded. 2, both with plates that turn up nothing in the system, likely stolen or using fake tags. 1 black SUV and 1 dark van. "We're trying to pull more footage from city traffic cameras, but that can take time. The one thing Michael didn't have. He turned to Doc, fists still clenched. "We need to get on the streets. Reach out to contacts, see if anyone heard about the Calabrese family making moves near the hospital. They're big in this area, and the style of that kidnapping." He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in that room knew. The Calabrese family was rumored to have a stake in drug trafficking and money laundering. It would make sense they were sneaking contraband through a federal veterans facility. Doc nodded, eyes narrowed. "We'll find them." Michael gave Al a quick nod of thanks, then bolted from the security room, Doc at his side. With each stride, a plan formed in Michael's mind. He would scour every lead, twist every arm, threaten every gangster if he had to. The criminals who took Kate had no idea the line they'd crossed. They may have thought they'd kidnapped a vulnerable nurse, but they just declared war on the deadliest Marine in the Corps. Outside, the sun glared off the pavement. Michael slipped into the passenger seat of Doc's SUV. "We start with our old friends in the law enforcement community," he said, voice shaking with barely contained anger. "Somebody must have seen something." Doc revved the engine. "I'll call Detective Mills at the local PD. He owes me a favor. If the Calabrese are behind this, we'll corner them and get Kate back." Michael stared out the window, the city blurring by. His world had narrowed to one mission: rescue Kate at all costs. Bound to the chair in a warehouse, Kate fought against the panic threatening to overtake her. She tried not to dwell on the worst-case scenarios. Every so often, she tested her restraints. The zip ties didn't give. Her arms ached, and her lips were cracked from lack of water. Time had taken on a dreamlike quality. She had no idea if she'd been there for hours or days. Occasionally, Vincent Romano or one of his subordinates would come by to interrogate her. They wanted to know how much she'd seen, who else she'd told. She spat out half-truths. The men threatened, occasionally slapped her when she refused to speak. But they stopped short of inflicting serious harm. For now. She knew that might change if they believed she wasn't cooperating. The biggest threat might have been a tall, brooding enforcer named Carlo. He wore a perpetual scowl, his jaw set like granite. He never spoke much, just glared at her with predatory eyes, as if deciding how best to break her. More than once, he loomed close enough that she could smell his cheap aftershave and the underlying stench of cigarette smoke. She braced for him to lash out, but each time he only stared, then walked away. Vincent Romano's method was different. He tried a veneer of charm, offering water in exchange for information. "How about you just tell me who else you told, nurse?" he'd say, swirling a bottle of water in front of her parched lips. "I'm not an unreasonable man. You cooperate, and I'll make sure you leave here breathing." Kate clung to hope, refusing to name names. She gave them nothing about Michael. Her mind repeated a mantra: he will come. Michael will come. She held on to that certainty the way a drowning person clutches a life preserver. To keep her sanity, Kate replayed memories of Michael. Like the time he came back from a classified mission looking haunted, how she coaxed him into talking about it, even though he was under orders to remain silent on the specifics. They had found a way to speak in hushed, coded references, enough for him to unburden just a fraction of the weight. Or how on their wedding day, he slipped a small compass into her hand and whispered, "This will always guide you home to me." She blinked away tears, forcing herself to remain strong. She wouldn't give Romano the satisfaction of seeing her break. Suddenly, the warehouse door screeched open. Footsteps echoed. Carlo entered, dragging a battered plastic chair. He set it down facing her, then sat with a slow, deliberate sigh. He studied her intently. Kate steeled herself. "I already told you," she rasped. "I don't know anything." He tilted his head. "That's interesting, because we found some photos on your phone." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew her cell phone. The screen cracked. Kate's heart sank. Her images of the crates. They'd gone through her device. Carlo smiled. "Don't look so surprised. We know you took pictures of the shipments. Then you tried texting them to someone. Who was it?" She swallowed, suddenly desperate for water, her throat raw. She'd never actually texted the images. She'd only considered it. Could they see the draft messages she never sent? She realized with a spark of relief that she hadn't pressed send. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, her voice trembling but firm. Carlo's smile grew colder. "Maybe you dropped your phone mid-text. Maybe the signals at the hospital are spotty. We'll find out. Either way, you're in a lot of trouble." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "And that means your husband is in trouble, too." Anger flared within her. She locked eyes with him. "Leave my husband out of this." Carlo let out a low chuckle. "I don't think he'll stay out of it if he finds out where you are. You must know that. You two share everything, right?" He said it suggestively, letting the implication dangle. Despite her dry mouth and pounding head, Kate forced a grim laugh. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Carlo's eyes narrowed. "Tough talk. You're just a nurse." She summoned the last shred of strength in her body to glare. "I'm a Marine's wife." Carlo stood abruptly. "We'll see how tough you both are. If he comes, he'll only end up in the same situation as you." He walked away, leaving her alone with her dread. As soon as the door slammed shut behind him, Kate allowed herself a single shaky breath. She fought the tears that threatened to fall. Every inch of her body hurt, and her hope felt thinner than before. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a voice repeated, "Michael is coming. He won't stop until he finds you." The Mafia didn't realize the unstoppable force they'd provoked. She imagined Michael tracking them down, unstoppable as a predator who sensed his mate in danger. The overhead bulb flickered, casting distorted shadows. The emptiness of the warehouse pressed in on her, but Kate held to the memory of her husband's comforting presence. If she stayed strong, stayed alive, help would come. "Man, this city has changed," Michael muttered as he and Doc cruised through the waterfront district. High-rise condominiums replaced the old wharf buildings he remembered from his younger days. Amidst the gleaming facades, though, the underworld still thrived. The Calabrese family had operated in the shadows for decades, entrenched in drug running, money laundering, and gun smuggling. Doc nodded, slowing the SUV near an old boxing gym. "You sure will find something here. This place is run by Rocco Marcelli," Michael explained, scanning the street. Ex-Marine turned underground fight organizer. If the Calabrese are pushing shipments through the city, Rocco might have heard rumors. They parked, stepping out into the late afternoon sun. The smell of sweat, rubber, and leather hung in the air as they walked into the gym. Young boxers hammered away at heavy bags, while an older trainer shouted instructions from the ring. In the back corner, perched on a folding chair, sat Rocco, burly, tattooed arms crossed over his chest. When Rocco saw Michael, his eyes widened slightly in recognition. He stood up, wiping sweat from his forehead with a white towel. "Walsh," he said, not unkindly. "Been a while. Heard you were still in the desert." "Got back early," Michael replied. "No need for pleasantries. Need information." Rocco grunted. "Figures. You never did just swing by for a chat." Michael bristled but kept his voice even. "Somebody took my wife. I suspect the Calabrese." Rocco paused, glancing around to make sure nobody was eavesdropping. Satisfied they had relative privacy, he motioned them toward a side office. Inside, the dull hum of the gym was muffled. Rocco sat behind a metal desk littered with old fight posters. "Calabrese, he said at last. "They've been making moves recently. Heard rumors they got into something big, something federal. Maybe they're moving stuff through hospitals or some government supply chain." That ring a bell. Michael's pulse quickened. "Harbor's Edge Veterans Hospital," he confirmed. "They kidnapped Kate because she saw something." Rocco cursed under his breath. "That's cold, even for them. I might know a guy who works as muscle for one of the capos, Vincent Romano. He's rumored to be using a warehouse near the docks for questioning people who stick their nose where it doesn't belong." Michael exchanged a look with Document. "Where can I find him?" Rocco leaned forward, brow furrowing. "Be careful, Walsh. Romano's no small-time punk. He's connected directly to Old Man Calabrese. If you go in guns blazing, you might start a war." A flicker of cold determination crossed Michael's face. They declared war the moment they laid a finger on Kate. Rocco held his gaze, then sighed. He scribbled an address on a piece of scrap paper. "This is the last place I heard about. Don't know if they're still there, but it's a start. Try not to get yourself killed." Doc nodded, taking the note. Michael clapped Rocco on the shoulder in silent thanks. "If anyone asks," Rocco said, "you never got this from me." "I appreciate it," Michael answered tersely. They left the gym, hearts pounding. Out on the sidewalk, Doc checked the address. "That's the old freight warehouse by Pier 17. It's mostly abandoned now." Michael took in a swirl of city traffic, the rush of pedestrians, and felt the tension building in his chest. "We go tonight." Doc hesitated. "We should call the police. We can't just storm a Mafia hideout alone." "I'm not waiting around for a SWAT team that might never get approval," Michael growled. "Every minute we delay is another minute Kate's in danger. You know, I can handle myself." Doc exhaled heavily. "I'm in, man. But we need a plan. We can't just barrel in. They'll have lookouts, armed guards." Michael nodded. "We do recon first, find a point of entry. Then we neutralize any guards quickly and quietly. Once we confirm Kate's location, we move in." Doc studied his friend. In that moment, Michael wasn't just a distraught husband. He was a trained Force Recon Marine strategizing a rescue mission. "All right, let's gear up," Doc agreed. "We'll need hardware." They climbed back into the SUV and drove to a storage unit on the edge of town. Doc had a private stash of firearms and tactical gear, some personal, some left over from his service days. They loaded 2 sets of body armor, suppressors, and a variety of sidearms and rifles. While suiting up, Michael's hands trembled slightly. He forced them still through an act of will. Focus. He tried to recall every special operations extraction scenario he'd practiced or executed in real combat. Except this time, the hostage was his wife. He pictured her face, her stubborn resilience, her unwavering support for him. The memory centered him and ignited a fierce resolve. By the time darkness draped the city, they were ready. Dressed in black, gear stowed neatly in the trunk, they set off toward Pier 17. The drive was tense but purposeful. The old freight warehouse sat near the water, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. It was the perfect place for covert criminal activities, desolate, with few prying eyes after dusk. Doc parked a few blocks away. They loaded their weapons, slung rifles over their shoulders, and moved in on foot. Michael felt adrenaline surge through him like liquid fire. If the Calabrese had Kate inside, no guard detail would stop him. The memory of her being dragged away flashed in his mind. He inhaled deeply, harnessing that fury into razor-sharp concentration. They found a vantage point behind a stack of shipping containers. From there, they watched. 2 men patrolled the perimeter, both armed. The building had a single overhead light illuminating a rusted door. A black sedan was parked near it. No other vehicles in sight. Michael scanned the upper windows. Some were boarded up, others shattered. Occasionally, he saw a faint movement behind a glass on the second floor, perhaps a lookout. Doc leaned in. "What do you think?" Michael's mouth was a grim line. "We wait till the patrol is on the far side, take out the lookout. Then we move in through the side door, if there is one. If not, we'll circle around back. Once inside, we sweep. If we see Kate, we grab her and get out. If we see Romano, we put him down." Brief silence. Doc nodded. "Ready when you are." Michael gave a terse nod, swallowing hard. It had to be now. Every second counted. As they positioned themselves to move, Michael's heart pounded with a singular chant. "Kate? Okay, okay." The moon hung low over the docks as Michael and Doc crept along the fence line, keeping to the shadows. The pair communicated with silent gestures, a habit ingrained from countless military operations. Finally, they found a small gap at the bottom of the chain-link fence and slid through. Michael's heart hammered with anticipation, but his mind remained methodical. They waited in the darkness behind a stack of wooden pallets until one of the patrolling guards passed, then carefully approached the warehouse's side. Doc peeked around the corner, spotting a door beneath a rusted metal staircase leading to a second-floor catwalk. The handle looked old and likely locked from the inside. Michael raised his suppressed pistol, nodding to document. With practiced efficiency, Doc took out a small pry bar from his pack. In seconds, the door's lock popped with a muffled click. The 2 men slipped inside, weapons at the ready. The interior was dimly lit by a few flickering overhead lights, enough to see rusted crates and scattered debris. The smell of damp and mildew hit them immediately. Michael's ears strained to pick up any sounds. Voices, footsteps, Kate's cry for help. Only the echo of dripping water. They advanced quietly along a side corridor, checking each doorway. Most led to empty storerooms or offices long since abandoned. Every so often, Michael's mind taunted him with worst-case images of Kate hurt or worse. He shoved those thoughts aside, focusing on procedure. Check corners, maintain muzzle discipline, keep eyes sharp. Doc stopped suddenly, raising a clenched fist. Michael froze. A faint light glowed from an open doorway ahead, along with low voices. They crept closer, pressing themselves against the wall. Peering inside, Michael glimpsed 2 men sitting at a table playing cards, a half-empty bottle of whiskey between them. One wore a shoulder holster. The other had a shotgun leaning against the table. Exchanging a glance, Michael and Doc made their move. They slipped in silently. Michael aimed at the first man, while Doc covered the second. "Hands where I can see them," Michael hissed. The card players jerked upright, eyes wide. The one reaching for the shotgun froze. "Where is she?" Michael demanded, voice as cold as steel. The men looked confused, not sure if they should make a move. Michael slammed the butt of his pistol into the nearest man's temple, knocking him off balance. "The nurse, Kate Walsh." "Where is she?" The conscious man stammered, "I don't know who you're talking about." "Please." Doc pressed his gun to the man's cheek. "Don't lie. All I know is that Vincent is keeping someone in the back rooms," he yelped. "I don't know if it's a nurse. I swear." Michael lasered in. "Which room?" "Big open space at the far end," the guard said in a rush, "with crates and stuff. Please don't shoot." Michael glanced at document. They couldn't leave these two behind to raise the alarm. With swift efficiency, they zip-tied the men's hands and feet, gagged them, and turned off the overhead light. Let them sit in the dark for a while. They moved on, the hallway darkening further. Soon they heard distant voices echoing off concrete walls, interspersed with the clank of metal. Michael's pulse quickened. Where there were voices, there might be Kate. Crouching behind a large crate, they peered into a cavernous room lit by hanging lamps. Rows of wooden boxes lined the walls, some stacked halfway to the ceiling. Near the center stood a metal chair, and in it Kate. Even from a distance, Michael recognized her silhouette. His heart lurched. She was bound, head drooping to one side. He willed her to move, to give a sign she was alive. Standing near her was Vincent Romano himself, wearing a dark suit, cigarette in hand. Two other men flanked him, one short and stocky, the other tall with a menacing aura. They seemed to be in the middle of an interrogation. Michael inched forward, trying to get a clearer line of sight, but the vantage was poor. Doc leaned close, whispering, "We can take them from here if we—" A sudden shout erupted from behind them. One of the earlier guards must have wriggled free of his gag. "Intruders!" The cry echoed through the hallway. Instantly, the men in the room snapped to attention. Vincent Romano tossed his cigarette aside, barking orders. Kate jerked her head up, eyes wide. Michael met her gaze for a split second, enough to see relief flood her expression. But now they were compromised. The stocky guard raised a submachine gun. Bullets peppered the crates, splintering wood. Michael dove behind cover, Doc following suit. Return fire was immediate and intense. The muzzle flashes lit the room in erratic bursts of light and shadow. Amid the chaos, Michael heard Kate scream, "Michael, don't let them," her voice cut off in a choke. Fury flared in him. He peered around the crate, took aim, and squeezed off several suppressed shots. The tall enforcer reeled backward, dropping to one knee, but not completely down. Vincent Romano ducked behind a row of crates, cursing in rapid-fire Italian. The stocky man kept firing in short bursts, forcing Michael and Doc to stay pinned. Doc gestured, flank left. Michael nodded. He slipped along the perimeter, navigating behind stacks of crates, each bullet whizzing past or sparking off metal. A few times he found a gap in the crates and fired, forcing the guards to keep their heads down. Suddenly, the tall enforcer Carlo reappeared. He'd recovered, even though blood trickled from his shoulder. He spotted Michael, raised his handgun, and squeezed the trigger. A bullet grazed Michael's arm, searing pain tearing through him, but adrenaline kept him moving. He dove, rolling behind another crate. Doc, from his vantage, managed to draw the submachine gunner's attention. With a precise shot, Doc caught the gunner in the thigh. The man yelled, stumbling. Michael seized the moment, popped up, and put 2 rounds into the man's chest. He collapsed, gun clattering to the concrete. Carlo roared, unleashing more shots. A bullet hit a crate near Michael's face, sending a shower of splinters. Michael coughed, hugging the floor. He locked eyes with Kate across the room. Her terror was evident, but so was her unwavering faith in him. Then Romano's voice cut the air. "Carlo, get the girl out of here." "Move." Carlo sprinted toward Kate. Michael cursed, trying to line up a shot, but Romano fired at him from behind another stack of crates. Doc managed a few covering shots, but Carlo reached Kate, yanking her chair backward. She cried out as the chair toppled, banging her head against the concrete. He hauled her upright, ignoring her thrashing limbs. Michael rose, ignoring the pain in his arm, and fired at Carlo. But Romano shot at him again, forcing him to duck. When he looked up, Carlo was dragging Kate toward a side door, and Romano was retreating the opposite way. "We can't let them get away with her," Michael shouted to Doc over the gunfire. Doc gestured at Romano, who was fleeing toward a car exit. "I'll handle him. Go after Kate." Michael didn't hesitate. He surged forward, hot on Carlo's trail. The corridor was long, each step echoing. He heard Kate's muffled screams, saw glimpses of her as Carlo wrestled her through a rusted metal door at the far end. He kicked through the door just in time to see Carlo shoving Kate into a dark SUV. The engine was already running. Michael sprinted across the grimy pavement, bullets from an unseen gunman ricocheting off the concrete at his feet. He fired wildly at the SUV, hoping to blow a tire or kill the driver. Sparks flew, but the vehicle lurched away, tires squealing. Desperate, Michael dove toward the passenger door, managing to grab the handle. The SUV jerked forward, dragging a few yards before he lost grip and tumbled hard onto the asphalt. Pain flared through his shoulder and ribs. He watched, helpless, as the taillights vanished into the night, Kate inside. For a moment, the world spun. Then came Doc, panting, face grim. Romano got away, too. "Did you see the plates?" Michael's vision blurred with rage and desperation. "No, they took her." A wave of despair crashed over him, but only for a second. Then he forced himself upright, ignoring the searing pain. "They can't have gone far. We can still track them." Doc nodded, though doubt darkened his eyes. "We gotta move before more of them show up." Michael's hands trembled as he gripped his weapon. Kate was still in danger. He couldn't fail her. He would chase them to the ends of the earth, but first he needed a clue, any lead that would guide him to her. He glanced back at the warehouse. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Someone must have alerted the police. They had to clear out. With a cold, steely resolve, Michael whispered, "I'm coming for you, Kate." Michael and Doc ditched their weapons in the SUV's hidden compartment, then slipped into traffic just as police cruisers sped by toward the warehouse. They exchanged tense glances. The city lights streaked past in neon smears. Michael's heart pounded, fury and fear warring within him. "They're probably heading to another safe house," Doc said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Romano won't keep her in one place now that we've shown our hand." Michael's grip on the dashboard tightened. "We need to figure out where. I shot that SUV a few times. Maybe I hit something." Doc shook his head. It didn't look like they were slowing down. Those vehicles are often reinforced. In frustration, Michael slammed his fist against the seat. "Rocco gave us one address. We need another approach." Doc hesitated. "We could have talked to Detective Mills. If the cops get evidence of a kidnapping, they might put an APB out on a black SUV. Might even have traffic cam footage." Michael ran a hand through his hair, the pain in his arm pulsing with each heartbeat. "Fine. Call him. We'll coordinate with the police. But I'm not waiting around for them to follow protocol. Kate doesn't have time for red tape." Doc pulled out his phone, placing a call on speaker. A gruff voice answered. "This is Mills. It's Doc Silverman, Captain USMC. I'm with Master Sergeant Walsh," he said swiftly. "We have a situation. Michael's wife was abducted by the Calabrese family. We tried a rescue. Didn't go as planned. She's still their hostage." A beat of silence. Then Mills let out a sharp exhale. "You're telling me you conducted a vigilante raid? We've got units heading to a warehouse shooting scene right now." Michael cut in. "Yeah, that's us. No time to explain. My wife's life is on the line. Can you help or not? Mills muttered something under his breath. All right, look. I'll see what we can do about an APB for a black SUV. If it was involved in a kidnapping and shots fired, it'll be a priority. But you two need to keep your heads down. The department can't be seen colluding in unsanctioned operations. Doc glanced at Michael. We just need any lead. We'll do the rest. I'll call you when I have something, Mills said, hanging up. Michael let out a bitter laugh. We're on our own. They drove aimlessly for a while, scanning streets for any sign of the black SUV. The city's labyrinth offered too many routes. Eventually, they decided to regroup at a safe location. Doc guided them to a small motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and plenty of vacancies. Inside the dingy room, Michael tore off his jacket to examine his wounds. The bullet graze on his arm was nasty, and the tumble he'd taken on the asphalt had shredded the skin on his forearms and bruised his ribs. Doc, who still had his medical training, cleaned and bandaged the wounds. You good? Doc asked quietly. Michael nodded, though every muscle screamed. I've dealt with worse. An uncomfortable silence settled. They both knew each passing hour diminished Kate's chances. Finally, Doc spoke. We should get some rest, even if it's just a couple hours. We'll be sharper tomorrow. Michael wanted to argue. How could he possibly sleep? But he recognized the truth in Doc's words. They needed clarity to plan. Still, the thought of Kate, bound and terrified, kept his mind racing. He paced the small room, replaying the moment she was taken from him over and over. At around 3 a.m., Michael's phone buzzed, jolting them both upright. He snatched it up. Walsh here. Detective Mills. We got partial footage of an SUV matching your description near the highway on-ramp. Then it disappeared off camera, but we suspect it may have headed east toward the industrial outskirts. Michael felt a spark of hope. Any particular district? Mills hesitated. The Carver Industrial Park is mostly deserted. Some old factories still in use, but a lot of it is under Mafia influence. That might be their new hideout. Michael's eyes met Doc's. We'll check it out. Be careful, Mills warned. I can't send units without more proof. The Calabrese own half the local politicians. My hands are tied right now. The line went dead. Michael rubbed his tired eyes. We have to go. Doc nodded. I'll drive. They hit the highway under the cloak of darkness, thoughts heavy with urgency. Michael leaned his head against the window, mentally replaying the tactics. The industrial park was vast, with dozens of possible hiding spots. They couldn't search randomly. They'd need a lead or an insider. A memory flickered. Wait, Rocco mentioned someone named Dante who might work as muscle for Romano. If we can find him, you want to track down a made man in the middle of the night? Doc asked incredulously. We have no choice, Michael countered. Rocco might know how to locate him. Let's see if we can contact him again. Doc grimaced, but he changed routes, heading back into the city. Rocco's gym was closed at this hour, but they remembered his home address from years ago. It was a gamble. Rocco might not appreciate a late-night visit, but time was running out. They arrived at a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Michael hammered on the front door, ignoring the hour. Lights flicked on. A startled Rocco answered in a robe, eyes narrowing when he saw the two Marines. What the hell, Walsh? You trying to blow my cover with the neighbors? Kate's still missing, Michael said. We need a name, Dante, who works for Romano. Where can we find him? Rocco cursed under his breath, glancing around. Keep it down. Look, Dante frequents a nightclub called the Mirage. The bouncer's his cousin. But good luck getting him to talk. Michael's jaw set. We'll make him talk. Rocco looked pained. I get you're desperate. But going to the Mirage is suicide. That place is crawling with Calabrese goons. Then we'll be careful, Michael said. Thanks, Ro. Rocco shook his head like a man convinced he was talking to ghosts. If anyone can do it, it's you two. Just don't get killed. They left immediately, the sun beginning to rise over the skyline. Michael felt exhaustion in every limb, but adrenaline drove him onward. The thought of Kate's resilience spurred him. He knew she wouldn't give up. Neither would he. The Mirage turned out to be a high-end establishment with tinted windows and a neon sign still flickering from the previous night's revelry. At 6 a.m., it was closed, of course, but a few cars lingered in the back parking lot, likely staff or criminals wrapping up their all-night business. They parked across the street, scanning the scene. A tall bouncer stood near the back door, smoking a cigarette. Doc placed binoculars to his eyes. He's wearing a black jacket, no visible weapons. Michael exhaled. That might be Dante's cousin. We'll take him quietly. They donned hats and approached cautiously. The bouncer barely glanced at them until Michael was within arm's reach. Then he tensed, stepping forward. We're closed. Doc moved like lightning, slamming the man into the wall, clamping a hand over his mouth. Michael pressed his pistol to the bouncer's ribs. Where's Dante? The man struggled, eyes wide, but Doc's grip was iron. Michael removed his hand from the man's mouth, just enough for him to speak. He's inside, sleeping it off, he gasped. He crashed in the VIP lounge. Take us there, Michael demanded. Trembling, the bouncer fumbled for keys, unlocking the back door. The corridor inside was dark and smelled of stale liquor. They moved quietly, the bouncer's footsteps unsteady. Eventually, they reached a plush VIP lounge, a gaudy room with velvet couches and a private bar. Dante lay sprawled on a sofa, half-dressed, an empty bottle of top-shelf vodka next to him. Doc forced the bouncer to his knees. Michael strode over to Dante. He smelled of sweat and alcohol. A gold chain glinted around his neck. Michael grabbed him by the shirt collar, jerking him awake. Dante blinked in confusion, then saw the gun pointed at his face. What the? He spluttered, trying to reach for something, but Michael pressed the pistol harder against his temple. Where is Vincent Romano holding Kate Walsh? The nurse he kidnapped. Dante's eyes darted around, fear blossoming across his features. I don't know what you're... Michael struck Dante's jaw with the gun's handle, not enough to break bones, but enough to jolt him into sobriety. Wrong answer. Dante spat blood, panic overtaking him. Listen, man, I don't know details. I'm just a foot soldier. But I heard talk about an abandoned canning factory in Carver Industrial Park. Something about keeping a package there. Michael recognized the phrase from his own military parlance. The package was Kate. Address, he hissed. Dante gabbled out the approximate location, Old Granville Canning, near the railroad tracks. That's all I know, I swear. Doc kept the bouncer subdued, while Michael quickly grabbed Dante's wallet to confirm his ID. A flash of an idea crossed Michael's mind, call it instinct. He took Dante's phone from the table and pressed it into the man's hand. Call them. Tell them we're on to the canning factory. Get them to move her. Tell them it's compromised. Dante hesitated, confusion etched on his bruised face. Why would I? Michael growled, jamming the pistol harder. Do it. Right now. With trembling fingers, Dante dialed. A groggy voice answered. Dante relayed the lie. Hey man, we got a problem. Some ex-military dude was at the warehouse. He knows about the canning factory. We gotta move the girl. The voice on the other end cursed. Michael snatched the phone, listening carefully as the speaker insisted they relocate the package to a more secure location. Another warehouse was mentioned, something about farmland outside the city. Michael glanced at Doc, eyes lit with triumph. They had just tricked the Mafia into revealing their next move. He ended the call, dropping Dante's phone on the floor. Thanks, Michael said coldly, delivering a knockout punch that left Dante sprawled. They did the same to the bouncer, ensuring he wouldn't raise the alarm immediately. Breathless, they hustled back to their SUV. Michael's pulse raced at the new information. If the criminals really believed their location was compromised, they'd move Kate quickly. But that movement created an opportunity. A caravan out in the open was easier to ambush. Time was short. "We head to the canning factory," Michael said, engine roaring as Doc peeled out onto the street. "We intercept them before they move her." Doc nodded, adrenaline surging. They roared onto the highway as the sun climbed over the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks. Michael prayed they'd arrive in time. A sense of grim determination etched his features. The game of cat and mouse was nearly over. The Carver Industrial Park sprawled across several square miles of decaying factories and rusted fences. Empty parking lots stretched out like concrete graveyards. The road leading to the old Granville canning factory was lined with broken streetlights and shattered windows. Michael and Doc parked 2 blocks away, proceeding on foot. The chill morning air carried the scent of dust and old metal. Michael's injuries ached, but he shoved the pain aside. He couldn't falter now. They found a vantage point atop a decrepit loading dock across from the canning factory. Through cracked windows, they spotted movement inside. Men in suits, carrying boxes and weapons. A black SUV was parked out front, likely the one Carlo had used to escape with Kate. Relief flickered across Michael's face. He was close. Doc fixed binoculars on a tall figure, giving orders. "That's definitely Carlo," he confirmed. "I don't see Kate, though." Michael scanned the perimeter. The main entrance was guarded by 2 men with submachine guns. Another patrolled the side. At least 4 more men inside. It was a small army. Without the element of surprise, a frontal assault would be suicide. But they had a card to play. The Mafia believed they would eventually show up here, but they also believed they'd have time to move Kate out. The Michael and Doc could strike right as Kate was being transferred. They'd catch them in disarray. Suddenly, the main doors opened. 2 men emerged, dragging a struggling figure Kate. Michael's heart lurched at the sight of her bruised face, but relief soared in him that she was alive and still able to fight. A van pulled up, engine idling. This was it, the relocation. Carlo walked beside them, barking instructions. Vincent Romano appeared behind him, phone to his ear, looking agitated. They were preparing to load Kate into the van. Michael's blood boiled. If that van left, Kate might vanish into the criminal underworld forever. Doc readied his rifle. "We can't let them drive off." Michael nodded, eyes locked on Kate. "We'll disable the vehicle first. Then we move in." Doc steadied himself, breathing out slowly. With a suppressed crack, he fired at the van's front tire. The bullet struck true, air hissing as rubber shredded. Before the Mafia realized what happened, Doc fired again, shattering the windshield. Pandemonium erupted. Carlo dove for cover, Romano shouting orders. The guards unleashed a hail of bullets. Michael and Doc ducked behind the loading dock wall. Chips of concrete sprayed them, the sound of gunfire echoing across the empty lot. Kate dropped to her knees, forcibly pulled aside by one of the guards. She elbowed him in the stomach, but her hands were still tied. Michael grimaced, wanting to rush in immediately, but he had to thin out the enemy first. Suppressing fire, he barked at Document. The Marine captain nodded, rising to deliver bursts that forced the guards behind cover. Meanwhile, Michael sprinted around the flank, using rusted dumpsters and stacks of pallets for concealment. Bullets whizzed past, the stench of gunpowder thick in the air. He crouched behind an old forklift, aligning his pistol sights on a guard attempting to drag Kate away. The guard was half exposed. Michael squeezed the trigger, hitting the man in the shoulder. He spun away from Kate, cursing in pain. Kate scrambled back, though still bound. Carlo spotted Michael and fired. Michael ducked, heart hammering. He recognized that they'd lost the element of surprise. This was a full-on firefight. He peeked out, noticing the van was now immobile, but the black SUV was still operable. Romano was shouting into his phone, probably calling for backup. Doc moved up, laying down consistent fire to keep heads down. He signaled Michael, "I'm going for Kate." Michael nodded, popping up to take a few shots at Carlo and another gunman. One bullet clipped Carlo's side, but the enforcer barely flinched, returning fire with grim determination. Sensing an opening, Doc rushed forward and grabbed Kate, hoisting her to her feet. She let out a cry of recognition, leaning into him. Doc ducked behind the van, fumbling to cut her wrist ties with a pocket knife. Bullets slammed into the van's metal side, each impact a deafening clang. Michael felt a surge of relief seeing Kate freed, but they weren't out of danger. Romano seized the moment, dashing toward the SUV. Carlo covered his boss's retreat, spraying bullets in wide arcs. Michael felt a hot sting in his thigh. The bullet grazed him. He stumbled, cursing. With Doc preoccupied helping Kate, Michael faced Carlo alone. The tall enforcer advanced, eyes filled with lethal intent. He dropped his empty magazine, slamming in a fresh one. Michael ducked behind the forklift as a flurry of rounds slammed into the metal. Carlo barked, "You should have stayed out of this, Marine. You're gonna die, and so will your wife." Anger surged through Michael. He steadied himself, ignoring the throbbing in his leg. The moment Carlo paused to reload or reposition, Michael slid around the forklift and fired. Carlo twisted aside, one bullet grazing his arm, but he kept moving. Behind Carlo, Romano revved the SUV's engine. The screech of tires tore through the chaos. They had to stop him from fleeing. If Romano got away, he could regroup with more men, maybe even retake Kate. Doc appeared at Michael's side, Kate in tow. She clung to Doc with one arm, eyes filled with relief and fear. The color had drained from her face, but she was conscious and mobile. "Michael," she croaked. He couldn't take his eyes off the raging enforcer. "Get her to safety," he ordered. "I'll handle Carlo." Doc hesitated, but then he nodded, guiding Kate away behind a stack of pallets. Michael and Carlo locked eyes, both injured, both unwilling to yield. Carlo sneered, raising his weapon again. "You're good, Marine, but not good enough." Michael exhaled, focusing on everything Force Recon had taught him: discipline, precision, and nerves of steel under fire. He feigned right, then pivoted left, firing a controlled burst. Carlo managed to dodge most shots, but one clipped his thigh, slowing him. Now or never. Michael lunged forward, crashing into Carlo. The man dropped his gun, but he was strong, grappling Michael's injured arm. Pain sliced through Michael, making him gasp. They wrestled, exchanging brutal strikes. Carlo's fist connected with Michael's ribcage, nearly knocking the wind out of him. Michael elbowed him in the jaw, feeling a crack. Carlo staggered, wiping blood from his mouth. "You're dead," he growled, drawing a knife from his belt. Michael's vision blurred from pain and exhaustion. But he focused on the knife. Carlo lunged, slashing at his midsection. Michael twisted away, the blade cutting through his vest. With lightning reflexes, Michael trapped Carlo's arm, twisting until the enforcer hissed in agony. Then Michael drove his own knife, drawn in the same instant, into Carlo's side. The enforcer's eyes widened. He crumpled to his knees, gasping. Michael jerked the knife free, breathing hard. Carlo collapsed. Michael stood there, chest heaving, adrenaline scorching his veins. A screech of tires snapped him back to reality. Vincent Romano was attempting to escape. The SUV sped across the lot, weaving around debris. Doc was too far away to block him, still shielding Kate. Michael raised his pistol, ignoring the burning in his arm and leg. He fired 4 rounds at the speeding vehicle. One shattered the back window. Another took out a rear tire. The SUV swerved violently, crashed through a fence, and slammed into a pile of scrap metal with a metallic crunch. A hush fell over the lot, broken only by the crackling hiss of the SUV's engine. Michael limped toward it, gun raised. Behind him, Doc helped Kate follow, the pair scanning for any remaining threats. Romano's door had crumpled in the collision. The passenger side was jammed against twisted metal. Glass littered the seats. Romano struggled to climb out the shattered window, blood trickling from a cut on his temple. When he saw Michael approaching, gun pointed, he froze. You and your wife ruined everything, he spat, voice shaking with rage. Michael's jaw clenched. That's what happens when you kidnap an innocent nurse. Romano tried to reach for his own weapon, but Michael placed a bullet in the ground near his hand. Don't. Wide-eyed, Romano slowly raised his hands. Look, we can negotiate. Money, power, anything you want. Michael's voice was as cold as steel. The only thing I want is you behind bars or dead. Take your pick. Doc and Kate arrived, Kate's eyes locking on the man who orchestrated her torture. She trembled with anger, tears on the edge of her lashes. He threatened my life. Threatened you, she whispered. Michael stepped back, letting Doc secure Romano, who was too shaken to resist. Sirens echoed in the distance. Detective Mills must have received calls about gunfire in the industrial park, or one of the local factories might have reported the commotion. Kate turned to Michael, relief and shock collapsing into each other. She flung her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He held her tight, feeling her pulse racing against him. I'm here, he murmured. It's over. She clung to him, tears breaking loose at last. I was so scared. I knew you'd come, but... Michael stroked her hair, ignoring the pain and blood. I promised you I'd always come back. Always. Doc looked on, a tired smile crossing his features. Around them, the carnage told a story of a desperate rescue. Carlo lay motionless. The SUV was smashed, and Romano knelt, hands zip-tied, glaring hatred. But none of it mattered in that moment. Kate was safe. Within minutes, police cars flooded the lot, lights flashing, officers shouting. Mills was among them, stepping out of an unmarked sedan. He surveyed the scene with a mixture of shock and admiration. Damn, Walsh. You weren't kidding. Michael helped Kate onto a makeshift seat on a nearby crate. She was shivering, so he draped his jacket over her. Then he turned to Mills. Romano and his men abducted Kate. We have evidence of illegal shipments through Harbor's Edge. This entire operation is part of the Calabrese family's trafficking racket. Mills glanced at the subdued gangster, then at the battered SUV. I'll see to it he doesn't wiggle out of this. We'll follow the evidence chain. With a kidnapping charge and attempted murder, he's going away for a long time. Michael nodded, weariness settling over him. Doc gave him a pat on the shoulder. We did it, man. Kate swallowed hard, glancing at the flashing lights, the bodies on the ground, the swirl of uniforms. I just want to go home. Michael squeezed her hand gently. Just need to give our statements, then we'll get you to a hospital. She managed a faint smile. I've seen enough hospitals to last a lifetime. Maybe a vacation first. Despite everything, a small laugh escaped him. The tension that had gripped his soul eased a fraction. They had survived. 2 weeks later, the sun streamed through a tidy suburban living room window as Kate gingerly massaged the fading bruises on her wrists. She was still healing, physically and emotionally, but the nightmares were less frequent. The largest comfort was that Michael was by her side, a calm presence whenever the memories threatened to overwhelm her. In the immediate days after the rescue, Detective Mills had coordinated a sweep of Romano's known properties. They found incriminating evidence tying the Calabrese family to illegal weapons and narcotics traffic through Harbor's Edge. Several high-ranking Mafia members were arrested. Vincent Romano remained in custody, awaiting trial. Carlo the Enforcer had died from his stab wound at the scene. Harbor's Edge Veterans Hospital faced a separate investigation. A handful of corrupt administrators were implicated in the smuggling ring. For Kate, it was a bittersweet relief. The system she had dedicated her life to had been compromised, but at least justice was being served. She'd also been placed on administrative leave for her own protection, and so she could recover. Michael's injuries, while painful, were mostly superficial. His superiors understood the situation and granted him an extended leave to be with Kate. She was grateful. He'd become her anchor. Late at night, when terror from the warehouse crept back into her mind, she'd feel his steady hand in hers, and the fear would subside. This morning, Doc dropped by with bagels and coffee. "Looking better," he remarked, handing Kate a paper bag. "Michael up." She smiled. "He's out back, probably tinkering with a grill or something. He's been restless since we got home. Army crawling around the house, triple-checking the locks." Doc chuckled. Can't blame him. They joined Michael on the patio, where he was indeed fiddling with a stubborn propane grill. The yard was a modest patch of green, with a small table and chairs. Kate breathed in the fresh air, cherishing the normalcy. Doc sat heavily, sipping coffee. "We got news from Mills. The DA is piling charges on Romano, everything from racketeering to kidnapping to conspiracy. He's not getting out anytime soon." Michael nodded. "Good." He glanced at Kate, eyes softening. "How are you feeling?" She looked down at her bandaged wrist, then back up at him. "Safe. Thanks to you." She turned to document, "And thanks to you too. I owe you my life." Doc waved dismissively, though emotion flickered in his gaze. "We owe each other. Marines stick together." Silence settled as they watched a pair of birds flutter onto the fence. The day felt calm, a stark contrast to the violence of 2 weeks ago. Kate closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her. The kidnapping had taught her a painful lesson. Life could change in an instant. "Any idea what you'll do next?" Doc asked gently. Kate inhaled. "I need to get back to nursing, eventually. But maybe not Harbor's Edge right away. I still love caring for veterans, but I need time to process. Therapy, maybe. Plus, the hospital's undergoing a massive reorganization after the scandal." Michael shifted his weight. "We could take that vacation you mentioned." A small smile curved her lips. "I'd like that." Then she sobered. "But we can't run from this forever. I want to testify against Romano, help the FBI build their case. If that means going through depositions and possibly facing him in court, I'll do it." Michael's eyes blazed with protective fire. "You won't be alone." Doc stood up, finishing his coffee. "I'll leave you two to plan your getaway. Just remember to bring me back a souvenir." Kate laughed, walking him to the door. "Count on it." After Doc left, Michael pulled Kate into a gentle embrace. The grill hissed quietly, but she ignored it, turning her full attention to him. "You're sure you're ready to testify?" he asked, voice tinged with worry. "Romano's lawyers will drag you through the mud." She nodded resolutely. "I'm not afraid anymore. If he thinks I'll back down, he's mistaken. I learned a thing or two from you, Master Sergeant Walsh." A faint blush colored his cheeks. "I'd do anything to protect you. But I also respect your decision to stand and fight. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with you." She leaned against him, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you too." They stood like that for a while, the breeze tousling their hair. Life beckoned with newfound clarity. Yes, nightmares might resurface, memories might haunt them, but together they could face whatever came next. That knowledge gave Kate a sense of renewed strength. Eventually, they broke apart. Michael turned his attention back to the grill. "How about some breakfast first? Doc bought bagels, but I feel like a steak." Kate smiled, the simplest joy radiating through her. "Steak for breakfast? Why not? We've earned it." Together, they prepared a small feast on the patio, a testament to resilience and survival. As the sizzling meat filled the air with a savory aroma, Kate closed her eyes, feeling the sunlight on her face, and offered a silent thank you for the second chance. Months later, Kate sat in a courtroom, testifying with unwavering resolve. She recounted the events leading to her kidnapping, detailing the Mafia's infiltration of the hospital's supply chain. Her voice shook at times, but Michael's presence in the gallery kept her steady. Across the aisle, Romano glowered in his orange jumpsuit, his lawyer frantically scribbling notes. When the trial ended, Kate emerged into the hallway, feeling a momentary wave of dizziness. But then Michael's arm was around her, supporting her. "You did it," he whispered. She nodded. "We did it." Romano was found guilty on multiple counts, his sentencing likely to span decades. The once powerful gangster was led away in cuffs, unable to hurt them or anyone else again. Outside, journalists clamor for statements, but Kate and Michael slipped away in Doc's waiting car. As they drove into the afternoon sunlight, Kate exhaled a long-held breath. The terror of the warehouse, the kidnappers, the near-death confrontations, it all now felt like a chapter in a book she'd finally closed. A new chapter awaited, one where she could dedicate herself to healing, to helping veterans in a safer environment, and to building a future with Michael. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he kissed her hair softly. "Where to?" Doc asked from the front seat. Kate exchanged a knowing glance with Michael. "Home," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "For now." She looked out the window at the passing world, alive with possibilities. The dark corners existed, but they would face them together. Because some mistakes, like underestimating a Marine's wife, you only make once.